Hello, this is Amanda back with another video for Fairy Stamper, and today we're going to be doing this mixed media card. It's a collage card, so I started off with some scrap papers from my bin. Can't tell you where I got them or anything about them, but just pick some scrap papers from your bin that you feel go together or inspire you somehow. And I'm going to tell you right now, I was not very inspired at all to make this card. I've been on the struggle bus lately, pretty much this whole year. Let's just put it that way. So let's talk about being on the struggle bus. First, I'm just going to say that I'm just collaging these papers on to a lightweight cardstock, using some collage medium in matte. Any kind of collaging adhesive will work for this, and so I'm just going to rip strips of paper or pieces of paper and just collage them down onto this 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch cardstock. And I am using a lightweight cardstock because I'm going to use a nesting die set to cut it down a little bit to fit the front of my card. So when I'm on the struggle bus and I need to create a video, I tend to go back to the basics or pick a technique that inspires me somehow. And this whole year, since my health hasn't been that great and we're getting ready to move, so our house is completely chaotic, I have been struggling creatively. So I decided to pick a simple technique for this, and it was collaging, and I wanted to do some mixed media techniques over the top of it. So that's what I decided to do. And I've got a ton of scrap paper that I'm trying to get through so I don't have to take it with me or throw it out when we move. So that's why I decided to work with some scrap papers here. And I picked colors in tans and greens because I kind of felt like they went together and they would go well in some kind of background. I hadn't even chose my stamps yet. So I felt like they would work with scenes or anything along those lines. So I'm just tearing a bunch of pieces of paper here, and really I had no plan at all. Like I said, struggle bus city here. So a lot of times I don't have a plan. Let's just put it that way. I don't often plan my cards. But this one I really had no idea whatsoever. Sometimes I'll go into it with some kind of idea of what I'm going to do, or at least a technique. And this is really the only technique I had planned here was collage. That's really kind of general here. So as I'm laying these out, I'm realizing that this is becoming very kind of strip-like. And I realize this is not exactly what I'm wanting it to look like. So that is why I kind of started ripping some other pieces and laying them on top of each other. And then I'm realizing that those are kind of becoming squares, and the more I'm doing, the less happy I'm becoming with this piece. But I know that there's going to be more. I'm going to do some texture paste over this, and so I'm trying not to let how this is coming out bother me. So just kind of trust the process, I guess, would be my advice for you when you're struggling, especially with mixed medias. Trust the process. The more layers that you build up, the better it's going to be. So don't judge the first layer of this. So I'm still trying to get rid of those like strips that, the strip look that we've got going on here, because I want it to look more random. So after I lay this piece down, I'm like, I'm still really not happy with this, but the more I add to it, the less happy I'm getting with it. So then I decided to add some die cuts, and I have this old Siizzlits die. It's called Little Leaves, and because I know that I probably want to go with some kind of a scene card or something, I decided to add some leaves, and so I'm going to decoupage these on here too. I'm not going to show you all this because obviously I've already showed you how to put paper on here a million times. So I'm just going to show you this one, and then the rest of them are going to be magically, through the power of editing, onto the back of the card, and I'm going to cut the excess, anything that's hanging over, off of it. So there we go. They're all on here. And I tried to make sure that I put the different patterned leaves on different patterned backgrounds so they would stand out a little bit. And now we have to prime the surface for any kind of inks or anything that I'm going to be doing. And so I'm going to use clear gesso for this. I didn't want to use white because that would obviously cover up a lot of my background. So I used the clear. And you want to make sure that you use gesso because that's going to prime your surface. The inks will just slide right off of the collage medium. So that is why I am putting a layer of clear gesso over the top of this, is to make sure that my inks are going to adhere or soak into the surface. So I pulled out this Ciao Bella stencil. I got this at Fairy Stamper. I will link it if it's still available. It's been several months since I got it. And there is pixie spray on the back of this stencil. This will come into play later. So I'm going to use some of this Crackle paste from Tim Holtz and the Distress line. There's many different kinds of Crackle paste. They will all work, whatever your preferred brand is. And I'm just going to put some of this Crackle paste in random spots and not fill in the whole background. And so that is going to break up some of the background, and we won't be able to see nearly as much of that strippy look that I had going on. It's also going to cover up some of the leaves, and that's okay. So we're just going to add some more of this in little random spots, and the stencil was not sticking down as much as I was hoping that it would, even though I used that pixie spray on there. I'm just going to finish that up, and we will remove the stencil. And it did bleed under the stencil, but that's okay. Mixed media is messy, so I wasn't exactly expecting a perfect result here. So when I got done with that, I decided to dig out some of my embossing glazes and sprinkle some of them on, and I chose a Speckled Egg first. We're just going to sprinkle that on randomly over the over the wet texture paste or Crackle paste. And then I chose Tattered Rose as well. And when you, we're not going to do the Tattered Rose yet. So I'm going to shake off some of that excess. And this is when I realized that, you used pixie spray on your stencil, and now it's sticking all over the background in places that I didn't want it to. So I'm going to deal with that later off screen. And now I'm going to put the Tattered Rose on and sprinkle that over as well. So once I got done sprinkling all the all the embossing glaze over this, I did carefully go off screen and take a brush and carefully wipe that away in all the places that I did not want it, because otherwise when I later add ink to this, that embossing glaze would resist the ink, and I only wanted the embossing glaze on the wet texture paste. So I did let the texture paste dry and crackle, and then I took my heat gun and heat set that embossing glaze. And now we're going to add some spray stains. I'm just going to spray that on there, and I was being impatient and didn't want it to drip, and it wasn't dripping as fast as I want it to. So I'm just going to go in with my finger here in a second and just smush that around, because I am an impatient crafter. So I did let it drip a little bit here, but I didn't really want those drippy marks either. So that's another reason why I'm just going to go in with my finger here in a minute and smear it around where I want it to go. It's kind of a quick way to almost get an ink blended effect. Here I'm going to use my water. I know I go in with my finger here in a minute. There we go. So I'm going to go in with my water. So this is tea dye from the Distress line. And then I don't remember the next color that I use. Oh, Bundled Sage. I am going to heat set that just a little bit. I didn't completely dry it, but I did mostly. And then we're going to go in with some Bundled Sage. Use a little bit of water. And then go in with my finger and smear that around. This is just adding more color. And since the Distress spray stains are a dye-based ink, They are translucent, so that's why you can see the pattern paper underneath them. If you were to use an oxide or a pigment based ink, it would basically just cover it up and you wouldn't be able to see those patterns nearly as well. Now we're on our last color, which is Salvaged Patina. And I thought that this was a nice way to just kind of brighten up that background. And then so I'm going to heat set one last time and make sure everything is dry before I move on. Once I got done drying, I'm just going to buff off where that texture paste was, and you do want to kind of be gentle so you don't buff off the little tiny pieces. But I just wanted to buff that off to get the inks off of that glaze. So then I'm coming in with a Faber Castelle Pitt artist pen, and I'm just going to give those little die cut leaves that we have in the background some shadowing, because I felt like they were getting lost in the background and I did want them to stand out just a little bit more. So because we gessoed our surface, this is now sealed, and that's why I can take this Pitt artist marker, which has India ink in it, and outline those leaves and then smear it with my finger and kind of get a shadowy look. So now I'm going to take the Dogwood Blossom stamp from Fairy Hugs, and I wanted this to be in color. So I'm taking a detailed ink blending brush. Sorry, words are hard today apparently. And I'm just going to use that to get into every little spot that I want. So I want the center of the flower to be yellow. I want the petals to be 2 different colors, that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to selectively ink up different parts of the stamp to get the different colors that I want. So I use Squeeze Lemonade in Distress Oxide. For the center, I'm going to use a Tattered Rose for the middle of the petals. And then we're going to blend out to Worn Lipstick for the edges of the petals, and then I'll use 2 different colors of greens on the stem and leaves as well. So we're just going to detail blend here basically. These little blending brushes are really nice to have. There's several different companies that make them. Mine are from Cat Scrappiness, but I think Altenew makes some. I can't remember any of the other companies, but there are several different companies that make these little detailed blending brushes, and they're kind of nice to have for doing something like this, or doing small parts on stencils that you want to do different colors, that kind of thing. They're really nice to have. So I am having to stamp this a couple different times. This is the first time I have used this particular stamp, and I'm terrible at priming my stamps, so I just tend to stamp them more than once. It's just what I do. But if you prefer just prime your stamps, you might not have to do that. So now I'm going to bring out that Worn Lipstick, and we're going to get the edges of the petals here, and I'm just blending that out. I did leave the ink, the excess ink from the Tattered Rose on there, so I had a little bit of ink to blend into so I wouldn't get any harsh lines. I think I do go back in with the Tattered Rose a little bit too, just to blend that out. We're just going to finish up the petals on the flower here. I did get a little bit where I didn't want it, so I'm just taking my chamois and rinsing, or not rinsing that off, but wiping that off. Oh, there, yep, I did go in with the Tattered Rose just a little bit to make sure that I didn't get any harsh lines here. And once we finish that, we're going to stamp this down. And I did have a little bit of issues getting a perfect stamp on some of those bottom florals, but I think that's more of a me issue and not a stamp issue. Yeah, you see right there, I get a little bit of a problem, but my desk isn't perfectly flat, so sometimes I have a little bit of issues with that. Just give it a good CPR, and there we go. I think that finally did it. Now we're going to go in with 2 colors of greens. I used Rustic Wilderness for my dark color of green, and I used Mowed Lawn for the lighter color. And we're going to do this one in one stamp. somehow I magically got it in one stamping. I love it when that happens. So I'm just going to mix those two colors right on the stamp there and then stamp that down. I think this turned out really pretty. Off screen, I did cut this out on my scan and cut. I did have to outline it with a pencil in order to get the scan and cut to pick it up, but that really wasn't a big deal. It was, to me, it's worth it to do that instead of having to fussy cut it. My hands don't work quite the way that I would like them to, so fussy cutting is really difficult for me. I would rather just take the time to outline it really quick and have the machine cut it. So I did decide to add just a little bit more texture into my background, and I took the Fairy Dictionary stamp and inked it up with some Black Soot Archival ink. And then I'm just picking up the stamp instead of putting it on a block and stamping that down randomly in some spots. And this way I don't get perfect stamping, I just get some random little words here and there. You can't really read it, but that's kind of how I wanted it to look. So I'm just going to stamp that a few times here and there and get some more texture and interest in the background. For a last little detail on my flower, I did take a Quickie glue pen. This glue goes on a blue color, and then it will dry clear and it dries tacky. So I'm just taking that and going in the white lines of the petals on the stamp and then let it dry. And then I'm taking the Fairy Hugs glitter powder in translucent pearl and sprinkling that over the top. And since the glue dries tacky, the glitter will stick to it permanently, and it gives that flower a nice sparkle like I'm showing here. It doesn't really show up the greatest on camera. Sparkly things are really hard to capture on camera. So I did finish the card by gluing the flower to my background. I did trim that background down a little bit so I could put a nice black mat behind it, and then I attached it to the front of my card. And that finishes my project today. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that it inspires you to try something simple to get you out of your creative rut and off that struggle bus. All the links will be in my description box below for all the products. If you are watching on the Fairy Stamper channel, I would appreciate you subscribing to both the Fairy Stamper channel and my channel. And as always, have a great day.